There are some neighborhood dramas that begin with property disputes, some with noise complaints, and some with yard decorations. But mine? It started with something far less glamorous. A plain, ordinary, black, city-issued trash can. It wasn't new. It wasn't fancy, and it certainly wasn't something anyone would look twice at. Yet in the quiet, suburban neighborhood I called home, that trash can became the spark that lit a wildfire. For years, I lived in relative peace on my cul-de-sac. The houses were close enough for neighbors to wave at each other, but far enough apart to give a sense of privacy. My mornings were routine. Wake up, head to work, and on designated days, wheel the trash bin to the curb. Simple, unremarkable, and exactly the kind of suburban predictability I thought I'd signed up for. But the illusion of peace shattered one morning when I stepped outside, ready to drag my trash can back to the side of my garage, only to find it missing. It wasn't tipped over, it wasn't pushed aside, it wasn't even hidden behind a bush. It was gone. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the waste collection company accidentally took it. Maybe a teenager decided it would be funny to roll it down the street. I scanned the block, and that's when I saw it. 2 doors down, neatly parked in front of the driveway belonging to Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our cul-de-sac, sat my trash can. Karen was the kind of neighbor who believed she ruled the entire HOA. She wasn't on the board officially, but she was in everyone's business, constantly reporting violations and pushing for stricter enforcement of rules. She had clashed with nearly every homeowner at some point, whether it was over lawn height, holiday decorations, or cars parked a few inches too close to the curb. Everyone knew her, and no one liked her. And now, there was my trash can, sitting smugly in front of her garage as if it belonged to her. Confused, I wheeled it back, assuming it must have been a mistake. But within hours, she was at my door. Her accusation was loud enough for neighbors to hear. I had stolen her trash can. She claimed hers had mysteriously disappeared and that I had conveniently taken it. The situation was absurd. I had proof. My house number was etched on the lid of the can in permanent marker. Yet Karen wasn't one to back down. And instead of resolving it neighbor to neighbor, she took it straight to the HOA. This was where things turned strange. Instead of siding with clear evidence, my marked trash can, the HOA sided with Karen. They claimed the bins were community property issued by the city and that disputes over them would not be tolerated. But worse, they issued me a warning for harassing a fellow resident and creating unnecessary conflict. The audacity left me speechless. Not only had Karen blatantly taken my property, but the HOA now painted me as the aggressor. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood, and while many privately admitted they knew Karen was lying, no one wanted to be the next target of her crusades. So I was left standing alone, painted as the unreasonable neighbor in an absurd trash can. War. What I didn't realize at the time was that this was only the beginning. Because once Karen realized she could get away with something as small as stealing my trash can and having the HOA back her up, she grew bolder. Suddenly, she began reporting me for every little thing. My lawn was too long. My recycling bin was placed improperly. My car was parked at an angle. Every week, a new violation notice showed up in my mailbox, each with a fine attached. It was obvious what was happening. Karen had the ear of the HOA, whether it was through intimidation, manipulation, or some personal connection. She was untouchable, and I was the perfect target. But while Karen thought she was winning, she underestimated one thing. I wasn't about to let this go. At first, I tried reason. I attended HOA meetings, presented evidence, and explained the harassment. My words were dismissed. Then I tried appealing directly to the board members, only to receive cold, scripted responses. The more I pushed, the more they pushed back, so I changed tactics. If they wanted to play dirty, I would gather proof. I installed a security camera facing my driveway and side yard, making sure every angle of my property was covered. For weeks, I documented every suspicious move, every moment Karen lingered too long in front of my house, every time she trespassed. To peek at my bins or snap photos. Slowly, a collection of evidence built up, a pattern of harassment that painted a far clearer picture than any HOA violation notice ever could. The final straw came late one evening when I returned home from work to find not just one, but two violation notices taped to my door. The first accused me of unsightly trash storage because my bin was supposedly visible from the street. The second accused me of leaving yard tools unattended because a rake leaned against my garage wall. Both were laughable infractions, but what made my blood boil was the timestamp. The notices had been issued in the middle of the workday, when I wasn't even home, which meant Karen had been snooping again, documenting anything she could twist into an infraction. That night, as I reviewed the footage from my cameras, I caught it. Karen, in broad daylight, dragging her own trash can back to her driveway, and then rolling mine, once again, to her curb. She had done it deliberately, just as she had the first time, only now she seemed to be making a habit of it. I watched, stunned, as the video clearly showed her smirking, pulling out her phone, and snapping photos, evidence she would no doubt send to the HOA as proof of my violation. The pieces clicked into place. Karen wasn't just petty, she was strategic. She had turned the HOA into her weapon, using false reports and manipulations to harass me while shielding herself under their protection. But this time, I had her, armed with footage, timestamps, and a folder of every violation notice. I prepared my case. I wasn't going to present it to the HOA just yet. I had learned they couldn't be trusted. Instead, I started digging deeper, reaching out to other neighbors, quietly asking if they had faced similar harassment. One by one, they opened up. Stories poured out. Karen had targeted nearly everyone at some point, and each of them had been dismissed or ignored by the HOA when they complained. It wasn't just me. Karen had built her reign of control through fear and favoritism. And now, I wasn't just fighting for a trash can anymore. I was fighting for my reputation, my home, and my neighborhood's peace. As I closed my laptop one night after compiling hours of video clips and statements from neighbors, I realized the scope of what was happening. This wasn't a petty feud anymore. This was war, and Karen had no idea what was coming. War in a neighborhood doesn't look like shouting matches across fences or dramatic fistfights in the street. Sometimes it's much quieter, more insidious, fought with letters in mailboxes, whispered complaints and violation notices. And in my neighborhood, Karen had mastered that quiet war. After weeks of being targeted, I realized Karen's confidence came from more than her personality. She wasn't just a meddlesome neighbor. She was someone with influence, someone who had learned to weaponize the HOA's authority for her own gain. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If the HOA ignored clear evidence and chose to believe her ridiculous claims, then either they were incompetent or they were protecting her. With my folder of evidence growing larger every week, I decided it was time to test the waters. I started by attending another HOA meeting, this time not as a homeowner seeking help, but as an observer. The meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a beige brick building that smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax. Folding chairs lined the room, and a long table sat at the front where the board members perched with their binders and gavel, pretending they were more important than they were. Karen wasn't technically a board member, but she might as well have been. She sat in the front row, whispering into the ear of the president, a man named Rick, who seemed more interested in nodding at her than addressing the rest of us. Every time a topic came up, Karen's hand shot into the air with suggestions, and somehow every one of them became a rule or an action item. I sat silently, watching the dynamic unfold. It was clear Karen wasn't just reporting violations, she was writing the script. She was feeding Rick ideas, and he was pushing them through. Whether it was because of friendship, personal interest, or something else, Karen had essentially hijacked the HOA through him. That night confirmed what I already suspected. If I wanted to bring her down, it wasn't enough to prove she was harassing me. I needed to prove she was manipulating the board itself. So I expanded my efforts. My cameras had already caught Karen trespassing, moving my trash can, and taking photos. But now, I wanted to capture the relationship between her and the HOA. I started small, attending every meeting, sitting in the back, taking notes. I documented each suggestion Karen made, each time the board acted in her favor, and each time they dismissed a legitimate complaint from someone else. Patterns emerged quickly. Rules were selectively enforced, fines were inconsistently applied, and Karen was at the center of all of it. The more I dug, the more neighbors came forward. A family down the street admitted Karen had tried to fine them for leaving chalk drawings on their driveway, claiming it was graffiti. Another neighbor confessed she had complained about Karen's dog barking late at night, only to be told her complaint was not within HOA jurisdiction. The double standard was obvious. Karen's complaints became action, while everyone else's disappeared into thin air. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. I needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be ignored. And then fate handed me exactly what I needed. One afternoon, I returned home earlier than usual and noticed Karen standing near the HOA president's car, right in front of his driveway. At first, it looked like a normal conversation, but as I slowed my car, I saw her hand slip into a manila envelope, pulling out a stack of papers. She handed them to him with a smile that was far too smug, far too knowing. He didn't even glance at the papers. He tucked them under his arm, as if he already knew what was inside. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but I caught it. My dashcam, always recording, had a clear view of the moment. While the footage didn't show what was inside the envelope, it showed enough, a secretive handoff, casual but calculated. That night, I replayed the clip over and over. The image of Karen passing documents to Rick confirmed what I had suspected. She wasn't just an annoying neighbor with too much free time. She was feeding the HOA information, possibly even drafting violation notices herself. Rick wasn't leading the board. Karen was. Fueled by this discovery, I doubled down. I upgraded my security system, adding audio recording capabilities within the legal limits of my state. I positioned one camera near the edge of my property line, angled just enough to catch activity on the sidewalk without violating privacy laws. Slowly, piece by piece, I built a case that showed not just Karen's harassment, but her control over the board itself. And the harassment kept coming. Week after week, new notices arrived. One fined me for parking on unapproved pavement, when my tires barely touched the edge of the curb. Another claimed my garden hose was improperly stored. It was laughable. Yet each fine carried the same message. Karen was watching, and the HOA was listening to her. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They always overplay their hand. And her downfall began the night she got too confident. It was late, and I had just taken my trash out when I noticed movement near my driveway. I slipped quietly back inside, leaving the porch light off, and checked my live camera feed. There she was. Karen, flashlight in hand, crouched by my garbage bin. She flipped open the lid, rummaging through the contents as if she was searching for something. And then it hit me. She wasn't just targeting me with made-up violations. She was looking for evidence, anything she could twist into a complaint. Old receipts, packaging, maybe even something she could claim was a violation of waste disposal rules. But what she didn't know was that every second of her snooping was being recorded. The footage was gold. A neighbor trespassing at night, digging through someone else's trash. It wasn't just harassment, it was a clear invasion of privacy and a potential criminal act. The next morning, as I watched the sun rise over the cul-de-sac, I knew the tides had shifted. For months, Karen had used the HOA as her shield, her weapon. But now I had evidence so damning that not even her influence could erase it. Still, I wasn't going to rush. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in. I wanted her to know the same. Frustration and helplessness she had inflicted on me and countless others. So I waited. I let her keep sending violation notices, let her think she still held power. All the while, I was building the perfect case. By the time fall arrived, my folder had transformed into a thick binder. Inside were dozens of violation notices, timestamps of Karen's harassment, dashcam footage of her secret meetings with Rick, and video of her snooping through my trash. And perhaps most importantly, statements from other neighbors who were finally brave enough to step forward. I didn't just have evidence of petty harassment. I had evidence of corruption, and Karen had no idea her empire was about to crumble. Neighborhood drama has a way of burning slowly, like embers smoldering beneath the surface, until one gust of wind turns it into a blaze. For months, Karen had been that gust of wind, feeding the fire of control, weaponizing the HOA, and terrorizing anyone who dared to step out of line. But what she didn't realize was that embers can burn both ways. And when I finally struck, I made sure the flames consumed her carefully built empire. By the time I had gathered everything, hours of video footage, dozens of notices, neighbor testimonies, and the damning clip of her rummaging through my trash, I wasn't just holding evidence. I was holding a bomb. The only question left was how to drop it. I considered going straight to the HOA, but experience had taught me that was a waste. Rick and his inner circle were too close to Karen to listen. If I handed them my binder, they'd bury it before the ink dried. No, this needed to go higher, so I reached out to the city's code enforcement office. After all, HOAs weren't above the law. They operated under city regulations, and if corruption was happening, there were people whose job was to investigate. I scheduled a meeting, walked into their office with my binder, and calmly laid everything on the table. The officer listened, flipping through pages of violation notices, stopping at photos of Karen trespassing, raising his eyebrows at the dashcam footage of her envelope handoff. But when he reached the nighttime video, the one where Karen was caught digging through my trash, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. He didn't say much, but I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't going to be ignored. A formal investigation began, quiet at first, almost invisible. But Karen, always eager to flaunt her self-importance, made it easy. She kept piling on violation notices, sending emails, even boasting to neighbors about how she was keeping the community clean. All the while, the city was watching. The turning point came at the next HOA meeting. The room was full, more crowded than usual, because word had spread that something big was coming. Karen sat in her usual front-row seat, smug as ever, whispering into Rick's ear. The board shuffled papers, oblivious to the storm brewing, and then the city officer walked in, clipboard in hand, badge clipped to his belt. The room fell silent. Rick tried to recover, welcoming him politely, but the officer didn't waste time. He announced that he was there to address serious complaints of misconduct within the HOA. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen stiffened, her smug smile fading for the first time. The officer began laying out the evidence. He described the pattern of selective enforcement, the favoritism, the harassment. He detailed the testimony from multiple homeowners who had been unfairly targeted. And then, piece by piece, he revealed the recordings. First, the dashcam footage of Karen's secret exchange with Rick. Gasps filled the room. Rick stammered, trying to explain, but the officer cut him off. Then came the video of Karen, flashlight in hand, digging through my trash can in the middle of the night. The room erupted. Neighbors who had feared her for years suddenly found. Their voices, laughter, outrage, disbelief, it all spilled out at once. Karen's face turned crimson as her empire cracked in real time. By the time the officer finished, the verdict was clear. The HOA board was placed under temporary suspension pending a full audit. Rick was removed from his position immediately. And Karen, she wasn't officially part of the board, but her influence was undeniable, and her actions, especially the trespassing, crossed legal lines. She was issued a formal citation and warned that further harassment could lead to criminal charges. The fallout was swift and brutal. Without Rick shielding her, Karen lost her power overnight. Neighbors who once tiptoed around her now openly mocked her. The HOA, restructured under city oversight, rescinded every bogus violation and refunded fines that had been unfairly issued. My reputation, once tarnished by Karen's smear campaign, was restored. And then some. I wasn't just the guy with the trash can problem anymore. I was the neighbor who stood up, the one who exposed Karen for what she really was. But the best part wasn't the official punishment. It was the social one. Karen thrived on control, on the illusion that she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. Stripped of her power, she became just another neighbor. Except now no one wanted to talk to her. She'd walk her dog and people would turn away. She'd show up at meetings and find herself sitting alone. Her phone calls went unanswered, her complaints unacknowledged. The silence that once protected her now isolated her. As for the trash can, the spark that started it all, I never lost it again. It sat proudly by my garage, my house number still etched in bold letters. Every time I rolled it to the curb, I couldn't help but smile. Not because of the can itself, but because of what it represented. It wasn't about trash. It was about standing up to bullies, about refusing to let corruption go unchecked, about reminding everyone that even in the smallest corners of suburban life, justice could still prevail. Months passed, and the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board focused on real issues instead of petty vendettas. Neighbors grew friendlier, bonded by the shared relief of Karen's downfall. And Karen herself, she faded into the background, a shadow of the person she once was. Her house, once the epicenter of fear and drama, now stood quiet. Sometimes when I looked out my window, I'd catch her staring at me from her porch. The glares, the scowls, the silent anger, they were still there, but they no longer mattered. She had no power left, no audience, no shield. She was just another homeowner with a trash can of her own, stripped of the crown she had stolen. And as for me, I learned something important. Neighborhood peace doesn't come from rules or regulations. It comes from people willing to stand up when something isn't right, even if it starts with something as small as a missing trash can, because sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest victories.